G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and importantly, I hope you are having a great Friday heading into what I hope is an even better weekend. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. Of course, we're going to look at maps, geolocations, compare maps, see where things are moving, talk about the outcomes of this, and speak about some of the challenges that lay ahead. And speaking of the battlefield, we need to look at then the politics, because of course, war is just an extension of politics, and you can even say that vice versa too. So we need to look at the battlefield and then how that can leverage any negotiations and peace deals. And what we know is Trump, within coming days, is going to speak with Meet Putin, we are hearing. And there is media speculating that they have what is going to be suggested from the US or offered from the US to Russia. And we'll go over what that is, how may Russia see it, and how that, I know everyone wants a fair and balanced peace and a peace through power and this and that, but regardless of how long you want to ignore the battlefield, at the end of the day, the battlefield is just blunt force politics and will influence that. So we'll go over, is this what Washington is offering the Kremlin? Will they take it? We have a miscellaneous folder where we'll look at grants as well as a tragic loss, and we'll look at something I've been speaking about a lot, is drones are brilliant. Drones are fantastic, well, for a weapon system, if that makes sense. For efficiency and effectiveness, they both tick those boxes for being very cheap. But I've been saying for some time, I believe there is a risk of being overly reliant on drones. And we're going to go through a paper today saying just that. And I want to take it a little bit further again. So we'll start here at the miscellaneous. So we have this from Vitali, or at Monsters, one of the best on Twitter. He says this: a low Shahid week, probably busy replenishing depleted reserves. And we see this, that really every fifth day you see a large spike. And recently these spikes have been getting larger and larger. And this is where we've been saying we're expecting for the last week a large Garan drone attack from Russia to Ukraine. There's been smaller attacks, but not these that we had seen. Now, it may be replenishing depleted reserves. It could be that. The manufacturing, I don't know if that suggests that is the case. And it also could be Russia playing nice with Trump. We know Trump isn't happy when those big attacks go through. And while doing that, saving up for a very large attack, potentially we may hit that four figures. Now, this is an article here as well, that British father killed in Ukraine 1 month after signing up. And sadly, this war is taking so many lives, and it will take more lives as it's gone on, and will take further into the future as well. It is an absolute tragedy, and I think it's gone on for far too long. But this gentleman, he signed up to fight with no military experience, leaving his wife and family, his 12-year-old daughter, behind. Now, he signed a contract on June the 10th, and they lost contact on July the 2nd, making Mr. Newman's service duration 22 days. Now, I admire Mr. Newman's bravery to go and fight for something that he obviously was passionate about and believed in. And not like so many who say that they are passionate and will do everything, who sit on Twitter thinking they are defending freedom. But the front line is no place to be going if you've received no training, especially when you're responsible for those who you'd be leaving behind. Now, Mr. Newman, he has been declared missing in action, and his family now can't claim the benefits. But his service duration of 22 days, leaving home only on May the 7th. And what I'll say is this is irresponsible from the command and himself personally. As a former infantryman, this gentleman should never have been on the front. But I'm seeing more and more stories like this. As sadly manpower becomes a further issue, we'll see more of this. But at least in this case, it was Mr. Newman's decision to go and fight, knowing these are the risks, not being forced by thugs pulled off the street to go. So we're going to, I've always said this war, it is a catastrophe all over, and could have, in many cases, been finished much earlier or potentially even avoided if people actually did diplomacy. So let's talk about diplomacy. And this is what we see here from Polish media. We reveal details of Trump's peace proposals to Vladimir Putin. Moscow is expected to receive a lot. Also needs to be put out, today is Trump's ultimatum day. The meeting took place on Wednesday between US Presidential Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian President Vladimir Putin was likely the final straw in Trump's current policy towards Moscow. According to On It, Witkoff discussed the US ceasefire proposal for Russia, which had been agreed upon with European powers. As we have established, Moscow received a very favourable offer from the Trump administration. Now, why do we believe that this wouldn't be more favourable to Russia? Why is it that it's going to be more favourable to Ukraine, given the battlefield situation of those who actually believe in real politics and who are actually assessing what is happening at the front line? Now, we should by no means be surprised that this is more favourable to Russia. The battlefield is not equal, and the leverage that Trump has on Ukraine, he doesn't share that leverage on Russia. Now, Russia has been very clear. If they can't achieve their goals diplomatically, then they are prepared to do it militarily, regardless of the cost. And as we say, as Clausewitz said, that war is politics by other means. And if it can't be done by the pen, then it will be done by the bullet. Now, I am still unsure why so many have this notion that a ceasefire must come first before any talks can occur. I don't know why everyone thinks that this is it, because history is not on your side. Quote here, most serious negotiations that lead to an end are initiated while fighting continues, not under a formal ceasefire. There is no incentive for Russia to agree to give up their momentum, their superiority on the battlefield for a ceasefire at this point in time. If Ukraine was in Russia's position, we would not be telling Ukraine to accept a ceasefire. So, let's have a look at this. Russia and the United States have agreed that a meeting between Putin and Trump will take place in the coming days. This is from Yuri Ushakov, an advisor to the Russian president. We will look at what he has said in a second. Now, a possible rejection of the offer by Moscow would mean that even the most pro-Moscow politicians would have to lose any illusions about the possibility of reaching a compromise agreement with Russia. So if Russia reject this, which I do think could still be likely, going for those demands of areas of which they have annexed, I still think it's likely they may reject this, and people are saying even this is far too much and Putin wants more again. What do I think of this? Given the situation at the moment, I'm not saying it's fair, but I think it may be the best offered. So, the American proposal, a ceasefire in Ukraine, but not peace, but a long-term. This isn't a few days ceasefire to talk, it's long-term. Actual recognition of Russian territorial gains by postponing the issue for 49 or 99 years. So we'll recognise them for 99 years, and after that we'll come back to the table. The withdrawal of most of the sanctions imposed on Russia, and in the long run also return to the energy cooperation, imports of Russian oil and gas. If you ask me, this is not great, but I can't see it getting any better. Now, if they continues, the package also lacks a guarantee of non-expansion of NATO, a point consistently demanded by the Russians. Moscow has also received no promise to halt military support for Ukraine. However, the last point is reportedly accepted by the Russians. So still aid, no NATO movement. What I can't see with this is I don't see how, if this goes in, Russia's got no sanctions, Ukraine doesn't end up in NATO, the land goes. I can't see mass leaving of Ukraine. It will, of course, inhibit then foreign investment in Ukraine, and I don't see how Ukraine can survive further under this. But I also think that this would be maybe the bare minimum that Russia would even, I've written even agree to, but would even entertain, because Russia's attritional goal, it is to destroy Ukraine's potential to enforce their way as a byproduct of war. That you want your enemy in a nutritional war to rot from the inside out, and that it collapses before you have a breakthrough, and that you are enforcing your way through reducing their potential. And what does this do? It absolutely shoots Ukraine's knees out from under them. A little bit less than Putin's more maximalist demands, but still, I don't know how prosperous it will be the state beyond. Zelensky's advisor, Dmitry Litvin, questioned the information of the Polish portal on it about US proposals for Russia, saying nothing like that was said during Zelensky's conversation with Trump. Witkoff didn't say anything like that. He said other things. So let me know what you think about this. And this is what Ushakov, the presidential advisor to Putin, has said. So the offer was quite acceptable. So saying there was an offer from the Americans. So days, not weeks. Tentatively next week.
Ориентировочно, да, на следующей неделе. Сейчас будем работать, как... Что? Где будет, скажите? Я только что сказал.
А вот Рубио сказал, что теперь есть что обсуждать.
We're not exactly sure exactly when and where these conversations will take place and what exactly was offered. But I don't know if it's going to get better than that, even if people are saying that that is absolutely ridiculous. I'll refer you back to my video yesterday about Big Surge, where he says, well, if it's not going to be done by the pen, it'll be done at the end of a boot and a bullet. We will see. Now, this sort of goes on with this as well, and I've spoken a lot about, will there be accountability from commentators, from politicians, from bloggers, from media when this ends? And a gentleman has written this to me, and I think this paints a lot. I know that you've brought up this several times in videos. Will people take responsibility for selling the public down the primrose path? Call me a cynic, but I have zero faith in that happening when pigs fly and all of that. This is something we've already seen. Everything from immigration to Afghanistan to the spicy flu, the media, politicians push for policies and enforce a narrative that various commentators uphold due to ideological or monetary reasons. When the truth comes out, everybody ignores it and tries to obfuscate the issue. Regarding Ukraine, this has already started to happen. And in European media, the focus was originally on defending democracy for Ukrainians. Now the talk is about defending democracy in Europe. All talk about 1 million Russian casualties, 10,000 destroyed tanks, are not only fueled by Ukrainian cope and propaganda, but also so that all these experts, politicians and military commanders in the West can say, we did what we could, the Russians have been bled dry, and now that we are secure, we are the heroes. And as I've been saying, we've seen those goalposts and what defines victory being shifted again and again and again, and setting up for this as well, laying the groundwork and that pseudo environment. They can say this because they actually don't see the war as existential for the West, as you have correctly pointed out. But on a side note, I do think the Western politicians see the war as ideologically existential, but they do not see it as militarily existential. And I've spoken about this a lot, that for a lot of the politicians in the West, this war is going to be ideologically existential, not militarily existential. And that is why we see a large gulf between what is said in rhetoric and what is delivered in reality. Let's have a look at the map, see where things are moving. So, of course, here is Ukraine in the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the first area I want to come into is Pokrovsk. So we can see the red check. What this red check is indicating is ground that Russia has made over the last 24 hours. And you can see on both the Pokrovsk western flank around Udashne, Novomyalivka that Russia has made ground, as well as critically around this Rodyanske area that they're filling in, moving up in this sector again between these two reservoirs. Other maps have shown this for the best part of 2 weeks, so we will see. But you can see that that vice grip is getting gripped down further and further on Pokrovsk. So let's have a look on the eastern side. So you can see just in here above that area, so similar direction, different location. He's saying along then the railway and just to the northeast of Oryansky. I know we're splitting hairs here, but it does matter that this movement is further out in these directions. That's what Suryak Maps is saying. And then we come down into Pokrovsk itself, and you can see at Zazove that more ground is being made, and similar directions around Udashne where we can see the map moving just in here. So you may see a further push on that western flank to lock down that envelopment further. But let's further look into Pokrovsk and line something up together. Now, I cannot show you this footage. It is graphic, but you can go and watch this footage on my Telegram. There's a link below in the description if you'd like to see it, of this Russian soldier here. Further in the footage, you can see Russian soldiers who have been then hit and eliminated by drones or ground forces. Looking at the footage, looking at the gear, you can tell that these are better equipped soldiers. That tells us a lot that they are likely DRG elements. Not that it should be read into here, but it should absolutely be grey zone if DRGs are operating like Kupiansk. So let's line this up. Now, we're never going to get it perfectly, but right about where my cursor is, right in here, that is the location of where these guys are operating. And this is very deep behind the line. So let's go. That's close enough to here. To back here's the closest area of 4.3 kilometers. And that is a long way back. It tells us a lot about the fortifications to move into Pokrovsk are very, very thin. But it creates a whole nother issue in Pokrovsk, the same issue that I see in Kupiansk with those DRG elements working right on the western flank. This gentleman in my Telegram said, it's sad to see losses, but it also paints a different picture. Do Ukrainians actually know how deep the Russians have infiltrated? How does artillery and drones differentiate friend or foe? If they're that deep to have a better visual, I believe you have to pull back forces who are already encircled or bypassed so you can fight back more effectively. I honestly don't know how many Ukrainian soldiers were caught off guard by these DRG elements. Crazy stuff, but the problem with Ukraine is systemic. They're enjoying proving a point rather than military intervention. Optics over strategy. At this point, Pokrovsk is just a hunting ground for both sides, and the one who has more manpower will succeed eventually. And that maintains the control, the command control. When I mean command control, I don't mean physical command and control. I mean a command of the ground and elements of which you strike with superiority in artillery, weapons, and the logistics routes in and here to create that attritional balance. But this is what he's talking about. If there's troops right up in here, they're 4.5 Ks back. If you're Ukrainians down in this sector, or in Chernihiv, in Ri, in Kharkivka, in those areas, you'll be fucking on edge. And we've already heard about a number of blue on blue, so friendly fire incidents in Pokrovsk. How do your drones just hit? Like, you can't just drop something on guys. It's a serious, serious problem. And this is exactly, well, similar what happened around Sudzha and exactly what I said yesterday when we saw a Russian soldier right up here near Sobolivka in Kupiansk. That it may only be a few, but it's enough to absolutely put you on your toes. So let's move just to the east of here and then talk about Toretsk. Likely the most serious envelopment happening now that is incredibly ignored. So let's have a look. We have a couple of maps here. So you can see the first Suryak map. You can just see this further movement out from Toretsk itself in this direction here, of course, showing much different from the canal areas when we look at where Oleksandro Shultny is sitting. But movement up Romanivkia area as well through Shebanivkia also. And then further a step forward, because I believe Suryak was behind on this sector, he's showing movement like AMK was in this sector in the direction of this reservoir. Now, I do not know if it is this far, but we know confirmed from the deep state map, it is pretty far. Suryak is saying right up to this direction here. So he's suggesting some 1.8 kilometers different. Now, what I'm saying is this map is often 4 or 5 kilometers different from a geolocation, so potentially, as well as more grinding in the direction of Katarinivkia at the moment. And what this is creating, you've got this reservoir, you've got this area to the minimum of here, and your gap out is a maximum of 2.7 kilometers for this sector sitting in here. This is growing very, very critical. Ukraine, with the manpower crises, cannot afford to lose a large amount of soldiers to KIA or MIA on any sector anywhere. That just exacerbates the manpower issues again and again and again. So let's look at a geolocation here in Kateranivka. Now we have this Ukrainian drone footage here striking a number of vehicles, and you can see against some armoured assaults as well. Now from the footage, it looks like this was a repelled attack, but as well, from footage, it's always difficult because you can edit it how you'd like to edit it. But where this is in Kateranivka right here, some 4.8 kilometres behind the line. And this of an armoured movement, where we don't see armoured movements that often anymore, of 4 kilometres, should be of concern. Again, tells us a lot about the thinning out of defences and fortifications when we're seeing that day after day, whether by armoured assault like that or even by DRG elements. So let's move just north of here, Chasiv Yar, showing in Hirovkia, Chasiv Yar crossing across the canal, that more Russian advancement there. Then we have the Seversk front, Russia making more ground in Hirovkia as well in the direction of Srebrenica. Let's continue moving our way north, and of course then we get to Kupiansk. We saw that DRG working yesterday, and like we said yesterday, and like others have said, that doesn't mean that it's red. It definitely means that it's grey, but it can have large effect for how those are feeling right out in here and in Kupiansk itself. Following the capture of the locality of Moskovska, Russian army intensified operations towards Sobolovka, reaching the first houses of the village. So he's saying that they're reaching the first houses of Sobolovka. Again, weighed out on this, but you can just see how this is a huge problem, especially when you've got the Oskil splitting that in two. Let's then move our way down further south. And of course, we have the Velika Novosilkia front line. We see a little bit of ground being made just to the south of Novopil in the direction, I guess, of Huliapol. Keep an eye on this. We do have a Velika Novosilka map here by Suryak. He's showing similar direction, so we can confirm that. But then we come down to Huliapol, and we do have another update just here around Tamarivkia. So if we zoom in just a little bit more, we will start to see then where on the Huliapol, during the last 4 days, Russian army made new advances south of Tamarivkia. Now, I'm looking for where Tamarivkia is. It is sitting, Melanivkia, this Shavone. Sorry, the labelling on this map can be so bad. So we have Tamarivkia, this area shown here. I actually believe this may be the same as the Velika map. No, it's just somewhat further north of here, but you can see around this front, see where this sort of spires out. They're growing that sector that will likely break into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast further, and that can be of massive concern optically as well as militarily. Now, I think we have covered everything except this over-reliance on drones that we have been warning for some time. So let's have a look at this article and talk about it. NATO should not replace traditional firepower with drones, from a Mr. Professor Justin Bronk. Very good. I love reading his stuff. Now, this article, it touches on a topic that you and I have spoken about a lot, that drones are just really efficient artillery. There is no such thing as a Wunderwaffen. And although drones are incredibly efficient, incredibly effective, incredibly deadly, they are still not a Wunderwaffen. This is why we classify it as artillery. At the end of the day, it's infantry working with multiple types of artillery and armour that is still the king of the battlefield. But nothing other than men at the end of the day can seize and hold terrain. Drones are a multiplier, absolutely, but it's never a replacement for infantry. This tech fetishism that Professor Bronk, he correctly warns against the Western tendency to latch onto a single new capability, in this case drones, then overstate its war-winning potential. Remember, this single weapon of anything, of tanks to F-16s to whatever, you can name it, was going to win the war. Latch on in this because of tech fetishism. Latch onto that, and in the day, it still needs to work in a combined arms way. We saw this cycle play out before too, with precision-guided munitions in the 90s and counterinsurgency tools and operations in Afghanistan. That said, the West, they still need to keep up to date with trends and tools that we physically see working, and see how the Ukrainians are operating it and how the Russians are operating it as well. And cheap, numerous drones work. And the Western armies, they are getting drones, but there's very few of them, and they're super, super expensive because profits with a private military industrial, it's profit-driven, not effect-driven. The biggest threat to NATO, it isn't over-reliance on drones, it's the economic asymmetry. If a 30,000 FPV can take out a $10 million vehicle, the economics alone force doctrinal change. But these are $30,000 FPVs that are entering Western military, not these $500, $1,000 drones en masse that a country like China could pump out by the millions. But again, that's why I've seen that going from T90s moving to the front line to donkeys, not because there's a shortage of T90s, because they're getting smacked by ATGM and drones and minefields and the way that the battlefield is working. Same with why the Ukrainian forces are now training on motorcycles instead of using those shiny, pretty Leopard or Abrams tanks that were going to be one of these fetishes of a single new capability of war winners. He says this: over-reliance on uncrewed aerial systems or drones is leading to significant problems for the armed force of Ukraine and is not something Western militaries should attempt to replicate. I agree. FPV uncrewed aerial systems and one-way attack OWA drones have played an increasingly critical role in Ukraine's successful defensive efforts against Russia's grinding offensives. Russian forces have also scaled up their drone manufacturing and development capabilities by many orders of magnitude since the start of the full-scale invasion, because they saw how effective they were. As a result, the war in Ukraine in 2025 is overwhelmingly characterized by the use of millions of FPV drones on the battlefield and thousands of one-way attack drones supplementing conventional cruise and ballistic missiles for long-range strike campaigns. And this is the thing, is they need to be supplemental to traditional systems, not a complete replacement. And I believe Ukraine, heading into issues with munitions we have seen and infantry, they've had to, I'm not saying they've had any other choice, but they've had to rely on a single weapon system. And I have said again and again, I am skeptical about this over-reliance on a single system alone. This has led many in Western military, political and journalistic circles to proclaim that what we are witnessing in Ukraine is a revolution in military affairs that renders previously core Western equipment and doctrinal notions such as air superiority and armoured manoeuvre warfare irrelevant or obsolete. Big Surge speaks about this, that if anything, it just makes those original doctrines more relevant than obsolete as far as flank security, desaturation of assets. Drones has actually made that more relevant. Increasingly, for many in defence, things that involve drones in large numbers are tacitly or explicitly assumed to be a gateway to greater combat mass, lethality, efficiency compared to legacy platforms such as artillery, tanks, fighter aircraft, and submarines. It is certainly essential for European NATO members to prioritise rapid expansion of their own counter-UAS systems, as Russian forces would certainly use UAS on a vast scale and large-fire salvos of Garand 2 or 3 one-way attack drones in any future direct clash, or China. So they're definitely going to be in the battlefield if there is a further war. However, there are several reasons why it would be a mistake for NATO forces to rely heavily on massed small UAVs or long-range OWA drones to replace traditional weapon systems in pursuit of improved lethality and thus deterrence against future Russian aggression. So it can't just all be that as a wonder weapon. Relying too heavily on drones plays into Russia's strengths. The first reason is that Russian forces currently field the most formidable counter-drone or capabilities on Earth. Now, this is correct from people I know behind the scenes that work in the drone and the electronic warfare space, that the EW is by far their biggest concern of the world-leading capability there. I tried to get a friend of mine who works in the EW space on the podcast, and he said that there are two problems. Anything that I can say will be either out of date now or going out of date, and everything I can't say, I'll end up in a dark room. So apologies. People did want me to speak on it, and I tried to farm it out and see, because I don't know enough. People may say, yes, you are. I am, by qualification, an electronic warfare operator, but that was operating the equipment. As far as what's behind that box, I don't actually know. They have a wide range of dedicated sea counter electronic warfare systems, modified infantry weapons, and short air SHORAD systems integrated at all levels of the ground forces. These have already been refined over 3 years of high-intensity combat experience against a steadily increasing and evolving Ukrainian drone threat. Russian vehicles, fighting positions today benefit from now ubiquitous netting, spaced bar armour, padding and short-range jammers to reduce vulnerability to FPV drones. Again, what was taken as a piss take in the cope cage is now going onto Merkava tanks in Gaza. Russian infantry receive instruction on how to engage drones as central part of their limited training before being sent to the front lines. Again, we don't know how much of this training against drones is actually taking place. I know people like to laugh about hitting drones with shotguns. Everyone said it was useless. I'd rather do that than have nothing. I had a Remington 700 in our barracks in Afghanistan in case of this, so it's obviously not that stupid. And even dodging drones coming at you, I'd rather do that than not. It was an afternoon of doing it. Fair enough. Russian air bases and other military infrastructure are being rapidly hardened. We see that again and again, those Su-34, 35 aircraft being targeted now. They're getting, finally, concrete bunkers put over the top of a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Who would have thought? He speaks about, in most cases of these long-range attacks, that only a fraction of the huge volumes of drones launched by Ukrainian forces actually reach their targets, and still a smaller proportion achieve decisive damage when they do. I know everyone likes to say, you see a fireball at a gas plant, you say, it's gone. Again, it's not decisive very often. None of these Russian efforts render small drones useless. On the contrary, they are now the primary source of attrition against Russian personnel and vehicles in Ukraine. Now, I have no way to prove or disprove this claim that drones are the primary source of attrition against Russian forces, although I have doubt that it has overtaken barrel artillery. My main reasoning for this is, and this is of course very subjective, if drones were killing the claimed hundreds or thousands of Russians a day, we would have significantly more footage released. This is the same subjective style reasoning against the meat wave assaults. Remember when that guy said to me, we just don't release the footage of this? And I said, well, why wouldn't you? It plays every incentive of propaganda to do it, and optics and propaganda are unbelievably important for Ukraine. So if you're telling me you're not releasing it because you're not releasing it, that's bullshit, because I've seen blatant war crimes released and shared and bragged about too, okay? If there's something that makes it look bad or more losses, it's going to be released. So again, that's speculative, but I doubt that it's actually overtaken. But if the drones are killing more than barrel artillery, it's not due to not only drones, it's due to a lack of traditional artillery, not an increase in drones. And of course, we've seen starvation of shells and barrel life over the period of the war too. However, it's important to understand that this attrition from drones has been occurring in the context of a force, Russia, that is still constrained by minefields and forced to disperse by Ukrainian artillery, GMLRS, and ATACMS, Storm Shadow, Scalp, cruise missiles, and glide bombs. If NATO forces were to pursue mass drones at the expense of rebuilding stocks of these traditional fires, Russian forces would find it significantly easier to mitigate drone lethality than they have up until now in Ukraine. So it needs to be a force multiplier with traditional systems, not just on itself. And if you've got, we either have drones or this, you need still a healthy balance and mixture. Russian drone countermeasures are also gaining ground and have already significantly constrained Ukrainian capacity to concentrate FPV and OWA effects in a given time and place when needed. We've also heard talk about these DRG elements and drone hunting teams as well, causing a lot of havoc too. Ukraine is forcing Russia to focus on counter-drone capability and development. The second reason is that Ukrainian forces have been forced to depend even more heavily on UAS and drone systems due to personnel, ammunition, traditional equipment shortages after years of brutal attritional fighting. Russian forces have been able to focus steadily greater attention on refining their counter-UAS capabilities. This trend has been especially obvious since the establishment of the Rubicon Center of Armed Unmanned Technologies in summer 24. One area of particular concern is the rapid rate at which Ukrainian drone operator casualties have been increasing throughout the spring and summer of 25. As Russian forces have focused their efforts on triangulating operating hides that are rapidly bringing artillery, glide bombs, and other UAS to bear on them. There was a warning last year in one of my videos from the front from a Ukrainian special operator specifically about this triangulation. If NATO nations have to fight Russian forces directly in the coming years, they will face a force that has had even more time to further improve its already formidable counter-UAS capabilities compared to the already very challenging operational picture facing Ukrainian forces today. Conversely, the greater Russian forces' tactical, operational and technical focus on countering Ukrainian drones, the less they're able to focus on training and equipping their forces to counter NATO's traditional areas of military strength. Russia by no means is ignoring traditional means. I vehemently disagree with that. Many would argue, both from armour to artillery to the equipment themselves to the doctrine, that they are focusing far too much traditionally, attritionally and protracted, rather than actually bringing this into the fold of combined arms more NATO style. So I disagree that there's an ignoring of that. And we see what Mark Root says about building thousands and thousands of tanks. We see the Iskanders, we see other systems. But this is very good here from Planning on Protraction too, from a gentleman I had on the podcast. I'm tempted to declare dogmatically that whatever doctrine the armed forces are working on now, they've got it wrong. I'm also tempted to declare that it does not matter they've got it wrong. What matters is their capacity to get it right quickly when the moment arrives. And I agree with this, and we have seen that Russia had this. They dogmatically had their doctrine incorrect at the beginning of the war and their assessments, leading to early failures. And at the opening of war, likely, like he says, that we will have it wrong. That's not important. We're going to get it wrong. Let's accept that. What is important, that we need to be able to get it right quickly when the moment matters. And what I'd say is flexibility and movement within those areas is the most important fact to be able to swing from, right, it's this that hasn't worked, let's do that, rather than just beating a dead horse. Ukraine isn't winning, despite being very good at developing and using drones. And Russia has gained the superiority in drones recently as well. The third reason why betting heavily on massed UAS for lethality is a dangerous strategy for NATO nations is that Ukraine is still taking heavy casualties and slowly losing ground to Russian assaults, despite being a world leader in developing, using and innovating with military UAS. And it's not Ukraine. It's Ukraine and every other Western rich state pouring money into developing this. And these drones, and Ukraine is still taking massive casualties and is still losing ground. So it doesn't mean stop doing the drones. It means you can't just be completely reliant on that. Ukrainian industry alone has a target for drone production of 4.5 million in 25, having produced 2 million FPVs and 100,000 long-range drones in 24. According to Zelensky, again, any numbers in this war, I don't believe. Maybe more, maybe less. There's incentive for both. Partner nations and industrial partners have also contributed tens of thousands of additional drones of all types, and the funding as well, and research development, from FPVs, loitering munitions, and one-way attack strike systems, and front top-of-the-line technology that was meant to be from Taiwan in case of the Chinese invasion on then BEX too. Thanks to a large part of the UAS, a highly innovative way, but the Ukrainian forces and industry continuously improved and modified both equipment and tactics. They have managed to prevent large-scale Russian breakthroughs and inflict huge casualties throughout 24 and the first half of 25, but they haven't been able to stop this grinding rearward, massive casualties that could then break into a collapse rather than a breakthrough. However, the fact remains the Russian forces committed against Ukraine are significantly larger today than they have been at any point since the start of the full-scale invasion in 22, growing by at least 9,000 a month, we believe. And they continue to slowly grind forward. And there's a reason, because these drones are being used as part of a larger strategy with traditional systems, systematically. During the first 2 years of the full-scale war in Ukraine, Ukrainian forces inflicted devastating defeats on Russian forces using massed artillery, ATGM, and well-motivated infantry. The switch to ever greater reliance on drones has been driven as much by necessity as by desire to directly replace such conventional capabilities. Like I said, if the drone casualties are higher than these other systems, I believe that's driven by the not having the systems, more so than just desire. When available, high-end ATGMs, anti-tank bonus artillery rounds, and regular artillery are still prized by Ukrainian commanders for countering Russian attempts to break through the front lines because they are far more responsive and more reliably able to knock out vehicles and suppress massing infantry than FPV drones. So you can get batteries of these then firing in level grid squares. However, FPVs are far more widely available inside Ukraine and are better suited to inflicting steady level of attrition against personnel and vehicles over time. It is better suited at that for the war Ukraine is fighting to not having that. But if you just had a constant flow of unlimited artillery, that steady level of grind forward, you'd be better in that rolling thunder of artillery rather than single areas of saturation, rather than just completely like maneuver under the cover of massed fires. When the front lines are largely static, the slower response time and lower reliability of FPVs against hardened targets compared to the round, these bonus rounds, doesn't matter nearly as much, and has far greater availability, allows them to expand it more sustainably. Now, again, this is still in response, not active, in my opinion. But what we see in this is why Russia's drones are being so effective in their artillery, triple choke strategy, paint by numbers that we see. That Ukraine doesn't have the capability to do this somewhat from donations and then technical capability with aircraft and the mass of those aircraft and air dominance in areas as well. So what Russia is able to do in a traditional sense and using drones as artillery is you use drones to hold in areas, then you use your traditional artilleries, your FABs, your barrel artillery, to destroy and break through, and then you use your TOS to clean up. And this is the strategy where drones need to sit in as an arm of artillery, not a replacement of artillery, especially in a static-ish front line. The front line is relatively static for drones and artillery. Now, I know I've shown you today the front line's moving 4 kilometres at a time, and I say it's a long way, and it is a long way. But an artillery gun with 20 Ks of range, with it being able to move up and down, get further range and drones, it can still strike within that vastly quickly and destroy targets within it. Western forces aiming to transform their lethality using similar drone-dependent tactics are starting from a far lower base than Ukrainian forces today. We're starting from zero. From a wide range of tactical, industrial and regulatory perspectives, Western procurement and ability to rapidly scale up drone production will undoubtedly be slower than the Ukrainian industry has achieved under immense pressures of total war. Equally, the approach to regulation and certification of drones taken in most Western militaries in peacetime is likely to ensure even the best-intentioned efforts lag well behind the armed forces of Ukraine's hard-won capacity to constantly innovate and adapt. Yes, now it may be different in all-out war, but imagine in a Western military if you made something in your fucking basement at home and said, I'm strapping a grenade to this and going to the front line, okay? Even from that to red tape, it's going to be slow. And in the West, we see the Western systems to get a weapon from the table, from the drawing board to the front line, it's too slow, it's too expensive, it's massively bureaucratic, and very, very few people in Professor Bronk's position will actually admit this. And massive kudos for him working for a massive think tank like this to actually admit that this is the problems in the system too. Ukraine has achieved very impressive defensive results against larger Russian forces, but has not managed to retain the strategic initiative or operational momentum despite deploying millions of drones that are constantly iteratively developed by a system honed by multiple years of desperate fighting. Western forces are highly unlikely to achieve transformative lethality and thus deterrent capability against Russian forces by procuring 7, 10s, or even hundreds of thousands of similar drones more slowly with less practical experience. You'd think the Western military should just be getting anyone they could to come and train in this, and it's just not happening. Drones should enable, not replace, traditional NATO firepower, exactly like we've been saying for some time. A fourth reason is that there is far greater potential to deter Russia by investing to fill in the gaps and enable NATO's areas of existing military strength, specifically the capability to gain and exploit air superiority through high-end air power, and thus greatly multiply the power of a professional armies optimized for maneuver warfare. Now, this I disagree with because capability to gain and exploit air superiority. We've seen a lot of problems in air superiority and professional armies optimised for manoeuvre warfare. Now, I'm not confident that even with middling powers or weakened powers, that it will be manoeuvre warfare. This is the thing. If you were to say, grab a Western commander and shake him by the shoulders and say one thing, it's going to be, do not assume manoeuvre warfare and movement in warfare, and do not assume that you'll have air superiority. You may have it. If you have it, fucking hand shandies all around, we're going skiing with the boys in the back of the tank. If you don't, but you've assumed it, big fucking problem. Okay? And I'm not confident that if you step into this, there's going to be air superiority. Heard of the Houthis and what's occurred? Conclusioning. This is from an attritional war doctrine. The conduct of attritional wars is vastly different from wars of manoeuvre. They last longer and end up testing a country's industrial capacity. Victory is assured by careful planning, industrial-based development, and development of mobilisation infrastructure. That's how you win attritional wars. Now, many in the West have a very cavalier attitude that future conflicts will be short, decisive, with superiority in the air. This is not true for the very reasons outlined above. Even middling global powers both have the geography and population and industrial resource needed to conduct an attritional war. The thought that any major power would back down from the case of an initial military defeat is wishful thinking at best. Any conflict between great powers would be viewed by adversary elites as existential and pursued with the full resources available to the state. The resulting war will become attritional and in favour the state which has the economy, the doctrine and military structure that is better suited towards this form of conflict. And we see that many military exercises in the West run that it's only going to take a couple of months to then win the war. This is why many point out that there's this idea that if China can just survive the initial opening days, then they'll win. Look at the air defence stocks and the artillery stocks in a relatively limited war. A demonstration of how potent conventional air power is when applied is what the Israeli Air Force was able to achieve against Iran. He does say these long-range missiles that Iran wasn't able to fire off, they fired off a lot more and had a lot more impact than people think. Okay, I get that. Small drones by Special Operations Forces, loitering munitions, played an important role in enabling access for far more potent traditional fast jets armed with medium-altitude, long-endurance UAVs. So, again, let's go over this a little bit further because I think that Iran-Israel is not a good example of being able to quickly achieve air superiority. Localized dominance in areas, we see Russia have that. Air superiority is vastly different. And I'll go into Israel had that, but I don't believe it's a good example. There are many ways drones cannot already contribute to NATO's force structure and capabilities, but generally they are the most potent means to enable artillery and aircraft to strike targets responsively and or through active defences. One obvious example is the relatively affordable stand-in jammers and cheap kinetic and decoy drones that support suppression and destruction of air defence. They can be launched by ground forces to saturate Russian air defence radars and intercept your munition and then strike with something like an ATACMS against S-400. But you need to assume this is going to be happening the other way also. So you need to assume it's happening the other way and that that's going to massively affect if you have air superiority. There are good reasons to optimise around enabling NATO-led joint seed and deed campaign. Nothing in either the NATO or Ukrainian infantry can compete with the efficiency and scalability of direct attack munitions such as these, in a scenario where air superiority or at least access has been achieved. Again, air superiority should not be assumed. I think in a lot of exercises, we should assume that we don't have it. Because if you have it, your army, artillery, your arty, artillery and infantry, if you've got it, great. But if you train with having it and they don't have it, your doctrine is going to be fucking up the wazoo. Iran is a limited example. Now, obviously, Iran does not have the air defense capability and the stocks of a country like Russia, China. We saw US issues over Yemen because it was a complete air campaign. We saw Russian issues in Ukraine gaining superiority with a massive overmatch in the beginning. What you may get is local air dominance, but in a war against another great state, even a middling power with support, I do not think that we can assume that there's going to be easily achievable air superiority early on. I think I may have written on this. Maybe not. I believe that Mossad had here we go. Sorry, go back. That idea that if China can just survive the first initial days, they'll win. Now, I'm unaware of the accuracy of that point, but it's to make the point of that it will go into attrition, protraction, and that this fantasy of high tech is still going to then not be a wonder weapon on the battlefield. Now, you have to understand, unlike other wars, if you step into a great state conflict, it's not just yours going. There's hypersonics, there's thousands of drones are going to be coming the other direction trying to conduct seed and deed. Now, I said Israel's not a great example because in my opinion, I think Mossad, with drones on the ground and other systems on the ground, had more influence on Israeli air superiority than the jets did. The infiltration of Mossad, taking out, jamming, striking their systems, I think had more influence than actually the jets themselves. But this level of infiltration is unlikely in a state like Russia or China. So take that as you will. You can disagree. I hope you disagree. Let me know. Talking about this, these bombs can be delivered by a single targeting pod for credible deterrence and denial operation. NATO forces in Europe fundamentally need to convince Russian leaders that they can rapidly degrade and start the rollback of Russian ground-based air defense in the event of a direct clash. So that we will show you straight off the bat, we're going to gain air superiority, this, that, and then roll back. Again, assumptions, there's a very large assumptions around this as well, that they're going to be like the shirts Dennis was selling of flying over Moscow. We've not seen that happen. Okay, I know NATO's different. I know the F-35 and F-22 and all this shit is different, but I think the assumption of air superiority in a war in a decade, you're not talking about now, you're talking about a war in a decade. Russia's got all these lessons around S-300, S-400, S-500, Su-57, their fighter aircraft, XYZ, sharing with China. I think it's a fucking dangerous route to just be like, hey, boys, you get shot in the leg, we'll have fucking choppers coming in and boys jumping off with fucking dangerous. There's a viable route to such a deterrent capability for European air forces with support from the land component in the shape of long-range artillery and one-way attack drones for suppression purposes. It will still require urgent investment, but poses far lower risks than betting heavily on FPV loitering munition development in Europe for an effort to transform land forces lethality against Russian forces that are already highly proficient in counter-UAS. Fundamentally, it is far technically and tactically easier to counter a force that primarily relies on mass cheap UAVs or drones for its primary lethality, that is countered well-employed air, long-range fires, armour, artillery, mortars with a professional joint force. And this, again, I agree with. You're not just going to have a primarily relying on these. And that is that's been my criticism of the over-reliance on FPVs, because you're looking to counter one thing. And if Starlink goes down, it's simple as that. Fucking within hours, there's going to be big problems, rather than this being an arm and a very powerful arm of your military, but still employed with traditional systems. But it is also impossible to counter the knowledge of drones. I do think, as much as I like Mr. Bronk's article, I think he does downplay drones. It's impossible to counter the knowledge of how to build, how to fly, how to use. And this has been my primary concern with teaching yesterday's terrorists, apparently today's heroes in Syria and Africa, how to use these, how to operate them, how to develop them. If we stepped into a war like in Afghanistan, we would have 10 times the cost that we do now due to this. So don't downplay how much a smaller force like an insurgency already can stop such a massive force, but using a tool like this, how effective it can be. Nevertheless, NATO forces and their own counter-UAS capability remains essential and should be seen as theatre entry standard for NATO armies against any Article 5 context. This is because Russian forces already deploy even more drones than Ukrainian forces and are rapidly innovating how they combine them with loitering munitions, UAV-based ISR, electronic warfare, and ever-present artillery. So the TLDR, maybe I should have this beginning, is it needs to work in with traditional fires. You cannot just be over-reliant on one single aspect. But we need to enter this aspect learning the lessons which Russia and Ukraine are learning. That efficiency of cost and use is a number one priority of mass, not one per fucking unit of 600 people, which is happening in some Western militaries now, and there's people getting medals over it. No, it needs to be en masse, and it needs to be quick and quickly scalable too. And acceptance of flexibility. That, okay, this isn't working, do that. Now, the right takeaway is not stick with what we know, but that we need to evolve combined arms doctrine to fully integrate drones alongside legacy firepower. But we also need to be realistic about our legacy tools. And we need to be realistic that if a $13 billion aircraft has become, a $13 billion aircraft carrier has become obsolete, so be it. We need to look that if our legacy tools have become obsolete, to cut our losses and move into what we're seeing working. So there needs to be that integrate across legacy, but reassess legacy for not just because we've spent this money on it and we've got people that work on it, employs people. We need to focus on being the most lethal, adaptive, and flexible force first, and scalable in man-machine. Scalability is a fucking massive problem, but flexible, scalability, lethal should be the first things, not awards to colonels getting some shitty drone in that costs 50 grand, fucking getting someone who's a gender to pass an infantry basic. I don't fucking know. But that should be, I've put out the number one priorities, which we can see because the number one priority of mass on the battlefield, scalability of man and machine is currently winning the war that we are seeing at the moment. Tech fetishism, there is that Wonder Waffen mindset that I don't know where it's come from. Maybe it's this superiority complex of our weapon systems. And let's talk about Russia. That's not considering China, who has had none of their stocks degraded by this war. Zero of them. And the manufacturing, everything, a single thing in my office here is made there. Everything in your office is made there. The manufacturing, if Russia can pump out 1,000 Garans a day, I don't know what I would say the manufacturing of China is 50 times more. It could be. Scary thought. And you're assuming superiority, that won't end well. Russia assumed air superiority in the beginning and we saw the movement. Learn off those mistakes. But initial failures in an existential war will not mean that it's going to end that way, like many assumed, and many grew complacent, that would occur. And what we have in the beginning is likely going to be wrong. So we need to be flexible and not have red tape that goes, hey, look, this is wrong. We need to change that. And it takes 6 years and 1,000 fucking trials and $1 billion to do. Lethality, flexibility, scalability. Number one priorities. Legends, have a fantastic day. Have a fucking great weekend. Sorry for tracking you here for an hour. Look after yourselves. Have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.